Hey, what is up, everybody? This is JP representing jpfitnesspro.com. Today, I'm coming at you with another episode of the Exercise Science Podcast. And this episode is going to be going over tips that I can give you to help you improve your big three lifts. And those big three lifts are the powerlifting lifts, the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift. So even if you don't do powerlifting, if you have those movements in your workout program, the back squat, the bench press, or the deadlift, these tips are definitely going to be able to help you. And if you do powerlifting, these tips are going to be able to help you even more. So I'm trying to make these tips too not like the standard things that maybe are, kind of everyone knows. I try to make them a little bit differently, and things that I consistently see people do. And you might not do these, but if you do them, hopefully these tips will help you out. I'm going to try to make this episode a little bit shorter for you guys because I know I typically have longer episodes of the Exercise Science Podcast, and it still is a podcast, so it's not going to be like a 4-minute thing. But again, I'm going to try to make it a little shorter than my other ones because I know not all of you guys like listening to things that are too long. So it's just a couple tips for each of the lifts, so let's get right into it. The first lift is the squat. And this first tip may seem like you can apply this to everything, and technically you can, but I'm saying this tip for the squat because I see this happen more often with the squat than any other lift, and especially of the big three, but generally any lift. And I feel like when I apply this tip myself and I tell other people this tip, it generally helps them a lot. But the first tip is not doing a long enough or good enough warm-up. The squat, in the fitness industry, and a lot of people would agree from the opinions that I've seen and what I think, the squat is by far the most complicated of the big three, and it is probably besides like Olympic lifts, of your general lifts, not including like the snatch or clean and jerk, because they're way more complicated. But just considering like the big three and overhead press and bench press and bent over rows and squats, the general lifts that your average gym goer uses, it's probably the most complicated lift by far. Obviously the front squat would be right there too. The back squat is and this squat can apply to the front squat as well, but I'm specifically meaning the back squat. So I just feel like because it's the most complicated, it requires a very good warm up and a long enough warm up too, like a dynamic warm up. And when I see people in the gym, generally the best that I see in the gym, and this is just the best, I rarely see more than this, is I see people when they do have a squat day or they're going to do squats, they just do some rehearsal sets. That's the best. I see a lot worse than that. I see people just go right into their working sets, or just do one warm-up set and then they just go into their working sets. But the best that I see is people do a few warm-up sets. I never see anything past that, but I recommend you do a thorough mobility routine before you even do your rehearsal sets. Have 2 to 4 rehearsal sets depending on how much weight you're moving. Not even need more if you're lifting hundreds and hundreds of pounds. If you're a 500-pound squatter, then yeah, you're probably going to need more rehearsal sets. But generally, you're going to need a good mobility routine. I do, first I start off with 10 reps with just the bar. Then I go into a couple mobility exercises that focus on flexion and extension of the spine. Then I focus on mobility drills that focus on abduction and adduction of the leg. So basically mobility routines that help me with getting wider in the squat, because my stance squat is pretty wide for me. Then I do some mobility on dorsiflexion of the ankle, and then once I do that whole mobility routine, starting with that 10 reps on just the bar for the squat, I do the whole thing again. So I do it 2 times over. It takes me about 10 to 15 minutes. Then, once I'm done with that, I start going into my rehearsal sets. I'll do a couple sets with 135, and then I go up from there. So, depending on how much weight you're moving, you might need more rehearsal sets. But again, my mobility routine, including the rehearsal sets, takes about 15 to 20 minutes. So again, if you're not doing a thorough routine like that, then you probably should try it out and see if it helps you. Because me personally, I have bad biomechanics for the squat. I can't go ass to grass very neatly or very nice. I can't. I tried, and a lot of people I know can't. Some people can. You might have got the genetic jackpot and have short femurs, a long torso, and you're able to go ATG like nothing, and you look like you have a picture perfect squat without even warming up. Me, I have to do a good amount of mobility just to be able to get to parallel. Like you know how in powerlifting where you have to get the crease of the hips, I think it's below the knee. I don't know if it's at the knee or below the knee or just below the knee. But basically, if it gets white lights in powerlifting, I can barely get that with good form. I can't go any lower. If I go any lower, I start getting massive amounts of butt wink. My form just goes to shit. So and that's with heel raised shoes already too. So yeah, so that's my first tip. Definitely just look at your warm up, see if it's good enough, see if it's long enough, and make sure it's thorough so you can get a better squat. My second tip for the squat is not bottoming out. And by that, I mean, if you follow any type of like in-depth exercise like info anywhere else, you probably already know what that means. But if you don't, I'll explain it. Bottoming out means going to the bottom of the squat for you per your form, not cutting the depth short on purpose and then going back into the concentric portion of the lift. So basically going as far down as your stance allows, until you kind of feel like your body stopping you from going any lower, until that's the extent of your ligaments and tendons. Now, for example, so like when I go wide on a squat, I'll go down until I start feeling like that tension in my ligaments, tendons, and my hips, and just my overall musculature. That's as low as I can go. I can't go any lower, and then that's my cue to kind of come back up. The reason why it's good to bottom out. Now, let's give an alternative. Like, let's just say for example, let's just say we'll stick with the squat. I was going to give a different example, but I'll stick with the squat. Let's just say for me, let's just say that powerlifting depth is where I bottom out at. Let's just say I purposely stopped a couple inches above that because I just want to stop above that. If I do that, I'm not taking advantage of the stretch reflex from the stretch shortening cycle. People need to understand that ligaments and tendons have elastic properties to them that help with lifts, and they have a rubber band like effect. So when you don't bottom out, you're getting rid of that stretch reflex, and you're not able to lift as much weight as you want to. And you may be saying, why do I really care about numbers? Why do I want extra weight from the stretch reflex? Well, I guess if you're focused mainly on hypertrophy and you don't want to take advantage of that, that's fine. But even people who are training for hypertrophy, you want to gain muscle, I would still argue that you should have some heavy work in there, and you should, at some point, with obviously good technique, focus on getting stronger, and strength is focused on numbers. Because if you're a stronger person, you're gonna indirectly affect your hypertrophy. Because if your 1 rep max is higher, you're gonna be able to move more weight at sub maxes, which means that you're gonna be able to accumulate more volume over time, which means more gains in hypertrophy, more gains in muscle mass. So again, I've always said before that if you're focused on hypertrophy, you should train in a wide variety of rep ranges, and that includes heavy weight. And then if you're a strength trainer, you're obviously going to train in heavy weight. So regardless of what you do, you should be training heavy. And if you're training heavy, that means you're focusing on getting a higher 1 rep max, or maybe like a 3 rep max or a 5 rep max, which is still relatively heavy. And then bottoming out would be a good idea. So go to the bottom of the depth. Don't cut your depth short for strength exercises for what you can do. Don't do it. You're just going to be cutting yourself out of weight and volume and gains, as I just explained, and it's generally not a good idea. So if you want to put up better numbers, take advantage of that stretch shortening, that stretch reflex from the stretch shortening cycle. You know, your ligaments and tendons, they're there to help you during those lifts. They make positive adaptations to lifting just like your muscles do. So just remember that. So those are the 2 tips for the squat. Now we're going to move on to the deadlift. The 2 tips that I would give for the deadlift are pretty good ones. Again, these are ones that I commonly see, and I had a problem with this. And I'll give you an example. The first one is not coming to a dead stop between reps. And some of you automatically are going to say, well, you should do that. No shit, it's called a deadlift. But I would argue that you could still, if you like to, and it's more of your style, you could still have good form, not doing it in a gimmicky, cheating fashion. You could do touch and go reps. Some people do touch and go reps nicely. They don't bounce the weight heavily. They don't drop the weight on the ground too crazy. They just lightly touch it and go, and they continue to do reps like that when they're doing maybe like a 9 to 12 set or something like that. They're not bouncing it. They're just touching and go. But I used to do that. I didn't bounce the weight off the ground. I didn't use that as a way to cheat or drop, or, I just liked doing touch and go reps. But what I didn't realize was that, like, when you estimate, and I knew, well, I guess I kind of did know this, but I didn't know it affected it as heavily. But when I'd plug in like my sub max, like let's just say my 9 rep max or my 5 rep max, I think it was my 5 rep max at the time, into a 1 rep max calculator, that it's not going to be accurate. The estimated 1 rep max that comes out of that calculator is going to be higher than your actual 1 rep max, because when you're doing touch and go reps, like I just talked about the stretch shortening cycle, that even if you're just doing a light touch from the ground, that is going to aid you some on the lift. On top of that little touch and go that you're getting from the weights, it's going to be able to, it's going to be easier to lift the next consecutive reps, because the weight is, I don't care how light you touch it, it is a tiny bounce. But on top of that, you have the stretch reflex from the stretch shortening cycle of your muscles, tendons, and ligaments. So every rep besides the first rep is going to be easier. So think about it. Think about if you do touch and go deadlifts, the first rep is the hardest, and every consecutive rep after that is going to be easier. So again, what I'm trying to say is that because I did the touch and go reps, I plugged it into a 1 rep max calculator, my 5 rep max, and I was like, okay, this is my estimated 1 rep max. And when I tried my 1 rep max, I couldn't get it. Because again, think about it, your 1 rep max is from the floor, from a dead stop. So specificity is lower when you're doing touch and go reps. The consecutive reps are easier, and it's kind of like when you do touch and go reps, it's kind of masking your masking your true strength. It's making it seem like you're stronger than you are, and then it's kind of inflating your ego a little bit. So what I started doing is, and remember, that was still doing a good touch and go. I didn't bounce the weight. You should never even, regardless, bounce the weight crazy. But if you're doing a good touch and go, I would recommend that if you like doing the touch and go and you don't want to get rid of it, do that the last couple sets or something, or have that on a different day, or do that for a different exercise. But I recommend incorporating some deadlifts in your routine. I strongly recommend it, where between each rep you completely reset. It doesn't have to be a long reset. I read in the latest mass issue that Mike Zordos talked about this, and I didn't know this, but that he mentioned, and again, I trust his what he knows, but he said that it takes about 4 seconds for the effects from the stretch shortening cycle to go away, and by go away that means dissipate as heat. So that rubber band like effect you get from ligaments, tendons, and muscles goes away after 4 seconds. So if you want to make specificity as high as possible, what you do is you would do your setup for the deadlift, get down, set up, brace, and then do the lift. Control the eccentric, lower the weight, and then take a step back, shake it off, give yourself 4 or 5 seconds, and then do the next rep. That's where specificity is highest. So on your heavy work, you can do that. Or if you're someone who doesn't want to take that long between sets, what I would recommend is just at the bottom of the rep, just don't bounce it. Stop, pause, stay bent over, grip the bar again, and just kind of do like a soft reset. So just, do your setup again. You don't need to step away from the bar. You can keep your hands on the bar. So what I'll do is I'll do a rep, lower it, keep my hands on the bar, take a breath, take a couple breaths, then, brace again, get my form set up, and then I'll do the next rep. So it's about 2-3 seconds between each rep for me, about 2 seconds. So that has helped me a lot, because now I know what my actual 1 rep max is estimated. It's going to be a lot more accurate estimation of my 1 rep max. And on top of the estimation just being more accurate, you're going to have higher specificity. Think about it. If you did the touch and go style, let's just say you're doing 4 sets of deadlift with the touch and go, and this is something that Mike talked about too in that issue, the mass issue. This was I think a month or two ago, but was that if you did 3 or 4 sets of deadlifts, and you're doing touch and go style, the first rep is the only rep where you get a full true setup. So you're only training your setup and how to lift from a dead stop a couple times, however many sets you have, because only the beginning of the sets where you do it. If you do it the previous way I said, where you reset, do like a soft reset between each rep, or a full reset, take a step back, do everything all over again, each rep is going to be like a setup. So you're learning to do your setup more and more, so specificity is higher. So again, if you want to make it easy to kind of sum that tip up easy, is when you're doing 5 reps or less, do a soft or a hard reset between each rep. Take a full reset or a soft reset. Don't do touch and go. If you're doing higher rep work or hypertrophy work on another day, you can do touch and go. If you're only doing deadlifts once a week and you're not doing it another time, I recommend always doing some form of reset. Don't just do touch and go, because again, that's going to hinder you in the long run. The next tip that I'm going to go over for the deadlift is not experimenting with the sumo style. A lot of people that I know have never ever tried to experiment with sumo. Sumo is not cheating. There's nothing cheating about the sumo style. Now, if you're a strongman or you're doing competitions where you cannot do sumo, then obviously that's a different story. But if you're your normal lifter, or you're someone who's doing powerlifting where you're allowed to do sumo and you've never tried sumo. Now, I'm not saying that when you switch to sumo, you're going to love it. I'm not saying that that's the style for you. But I'm just saying that you should try sumo at some point in time just to see if it feels better for you and if you like sumo. In a best case scenario, you switch over because it feels better. Maybe you had low back pain doing conventional, or it just didn't feel right. And maybe you felt awkward doing conventional style deadlifts, so maybe you try sumo and it just feels better. So yeah, the best case scenario, you try sumo, you feel better, it feels easier, just feels more normal for you. Your lifts go up, everything goes up, you see more gains, you have no pains if you have any pains from conventional. Worst case scenario, you try it, you don't like it. Now the thing is, what I would recommend is you can't just try it once. Now I'm not saying you have to switch all your style for a year just to experiment. But what I'm saying is maybe you do add in just a few really light sets, some practice sets on another day. Maybe even if it's a back day or upper body day, just do a few light sets, nothing crazy. Do a light warm up, do a few sets just to see, and do that for a couple months. It's not, and that's on top of your regular leg day. You're not doing nothing crazy. It could just be with 135 just to get the form to see if you like it, so that when you do it for a couple months, you're like, okay, well, nah, I don't like it. I gave this 2-3 months. I've been doing this for 10 weeks, and it's just not catching on. Boom. But think about it. That 2 months could benefit you for a lifetime if you end up liking sumo. I just feel like sumo gets a bad rep from people saying, oh, it's cheating, you're cutting the range of motion. When Greg Knuckles goes over that a lot, and how you're supposed to look at the moment arm, you're supposed to look at it relative to the femur, not from the side, from front to back, from the hips. So I'm not going to go too much into that because that's a whole nother topic. But Greg talks about it a lot. Just go to strongerbyscience.com. I think that was what it is. Or you could just type in Stronger by Science on Google and then deadlift, and then Greg Knuckles' article is going to come up, and you can look at his deadlift article. He goes over that and explains that pretty thoroughly. So yeah, just try a sumo and see if it works for you. Again, because I either it gets a bad rep or you haven't tried it. Again, you don't know if it works for you or not. Moving on to the bench press, and again, the bench press isn't crazy complicated, but there still are things that I see. I have 2 tips, just like the other 2 lifts. One of them is fairly, I would say, a common thing that you either know or you don't. And the other one is pretty uncommon that people don't pay attention to. But I'll go over the one that you probably already know, that you already may or may not know, but I still see it. Maybe you should focus on it, even if you're like, oh, I do that. Maybe you think you do it, but you don't. And its feet aren't planted firmly on the floor. I see this all the time, and I see this anytime people lift. If you look at someone's feet, their feet are like dancing all over the place. They're changing, they're moving, they're adjusting. Try doing this with the real lightweight one time with the spotter. So make sure you have a spotter. Make sure you're doing this with a lot lighter weight than you do. Do a bench press with one leg off the floor and one leg on the floor. You're going to feel like your ability to drive force through the bar is much, much higher. It's much, much lower than if you had both feet on the floor planted firmly. Now, if you're doing a bench press and your feet are dancing or moving or scooting or adjusting during the lift, it's not going to be, even though you may feel like you want to do that during the lift. The reason why you probably want to do that during the lift is probably other reasons. You're kind of, compensating for other issues. Maybe you lack mobility. Maybe you didn't start in a good position. Because if you don't start in a good position and the weight, you unrack the weight, you may think, oh, this doesn't feel like as powerful as a position I could have got. Maybe you need to find a better position and keep that position. And then specificity will increase. but your feet should not be moving at all. Your feet should be completely planted on the floor, as is your whole body should be, you know. And the reason why I wanted to include this one is, one, because I see it all the time, people's feet moving, which again, your ability to drive force through the bar diminishes a little bit if your feet move a little bit, and the more they move, it diminishes a lot. If someone has a good position and their feet are planted firmly in place and they're extremely tight, their body's tight and rigid, they're going to be able to drive force through that bar a lot better, and they're going to be able to lift a lot more weight. And for your average lifter, that helps a ton. You're going to lift a lot of weight. But for your power lifter, you can't. Your feet can't move. Your feet move, your ass comes off the bench, it's going to be a no-go. You're going to get a red light. So again, for powerlifter, that matters even more. So I would definitely recommend you look at your feet, have someone check your feet out, and your feet should not be moving throughout the lift. Just find a spot that you like, get tight, and keep them there. If you have to do a small mobility routine before your benches, you need to do that. You got to do what you got to do. So that's something that was one of the tips for the bench press. The last tip for the bench press, and the last tip of the podcast, is for the bar movement, the bar pattern. Is that a lot of times, and again, Greg Knuckles goes over this a lot, and I didn't know this a while ago, when I started learning about it, but the bar should not be moving straight up and down. And most of the time it doesn't. Naturally, for people when they're lifting, it can't move straight up and down, especially if you're moving a decent amount of weight for you. But still, the way that bar moves is kind of odd for most people. If you're looking at someone bench pressing from the side, the bar should be moving in a J pattern. And by J, like, it doesn't matter what side. If you're viewing it from one side, it'll be a regular J, and if you're viewing it from the other side, it's going to be a reverse J. But it should be from a J pattern. So if you think of the letter J, it should be slightly lower on the chest at the bottom, and your arms should be slightly adducted. So they're going to be a little bit lower on the chest, and the reason why you're supposed to do that is have the bar lower on the chest at the bottom and your arms adducted a little bit, adducted at the shoulder, is a few reasons. One, if you weren't to adduct at the shoulder a little bit and you just went straight down like a guillotine press, that's putting your shoulder in a very extreme range of motion that's probably not good for your shoulder. Most people can't do that, and you're probably asking for an injury if you do that. The second thing is that muscle fibers, when they're at extreme ranges of motion, when they're like at very wide, like the end point of the range of motion, they're not very strong. A muscle is strongest when the cross bridges are like at the middle. When the cross bridges are very tight, it's weak, and when they're very spread apart, it's weak. So they're strongest in the middle. So when you come down at a bench press, when you go slightly lower on the chest and you have a healthy arch in your back, you're not taking your chest musculature to an extreme range of motion, which again will put it at a very weak point, and then it's also detrimental to the shoulder. So that's why you do that. So if you want to come down a little bit on the chest, where is the bar going to be at the top? The bar should be directly over your shoulder sockets at the top of the movement. Because think about it, if it wasn't, you're basically kind of doing a front raise with the bench press. Think about if you had the bar at the very top. Let's just say you unrack the bar from the bench press. You can put your hands up and pretend like you're doing that right now. Now, move the bar slightly towards your feet, but keep your arms locked out, but move the bar slightly towards your feet. Or if you're pretending to hold a bar, do that. If you kept doing that, eventually you wouldn't be able to hold straight arms like that with a bench press amount of weight, because you're essentially doing a front raise. And you are literally asking to completely destroy your shoulder if you do something like that, because you can't do that. It's just too much weight for what you're trying to do. So if the bar has to be directly over your shoulder sockets at the top of the movement, and it has to be slightly lower, like slightly more towards your feet at the bottom of the movement, that's automatically going to make you go into a J pattern. And then again, in the article that Greg Knuckles wrote, they looked at bar path of elite bench pressers, and what do you know? It made a J pattern. So basically, if you want to maximize the efficiency of the lift, of the way muscle functions, with cross bridge attachment and how strong you are at certain points throughout the lift, and then you want to keep healthy shoulders, again, you could read the article too that Greg Knuckles wrote. He's a very smart guy. Then again, you want the bar to move into a J pattern if you're looking at it from the side. Okay, so, yep, those are my 6 tips for you guys. 2 squat, 2 deadlift, 2 bench press. I hope they helped you. If you guys need some clarification on anything that I said during this podcast, please let me know. I will clarify. You can comment down below. Click on this podcast. If you're on my website, click on the podcast, and it should take you to the podcast on its own page where you can comment through Discus. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can comment down below, or on SoundCloud, you could comment down below, I'm pretty sure as well. Or you can email me or get me on Facebook. I'm always posting on my social media websites. But if you guys have any questions, comments, you guys already know what to do. If you guys have recommendations for future videos or future editions of the Exercise Science Podcast, let me know. But I will see you guys next time.